Nobody warned me that the cruelest wounds don't bleed. They arrive wrapped in ribbon, handed to every child in the room except yours. I used to think my mother was complicated. That was the gentle word I used, the diplomatic word, the word you use when you've spent 3 decades convincing yourself that the woman who raised you is merely flawed rather than deliberately cruel. Complicated. Like a crossword puzzle with missing letters. Like a lock you haven't found the key to yet. I told that story to myself for 37 years, and I told it so well I almost believed it. My name is Vesper. Not the cocktail, not the evening star, though my mother named me after both in a rare moment of poetry she never repeated. My daughter's name is Sable. 8 years old, gap-toothed, obsessed with deep-sea creatures and the way shadows move on ceilings at night. She collects words the way other children collect stickers, iridescent, crepuscular, abyssal, liminal. She writes them on index cards and keeps them in a shoebox under her bed like a private treasury. My brother Cormac has 3 children, Theoden, Brix, and little Orla, who was born with her father's exact jaw and her grandmother's capacity for receiving gifts graciously. My sister-in-law, Fenna, is the kind of woman who sends thank you notes within 48 hours and always knows which fork to use. Our mother, Marisol, adores her. Marisol adores all of them, the whole luminous constellation of Cormac's family, the way you adore something you designed yourself. I was not designed. I was, according to the mythology our mother maintained, a surprise. She said this the way someone says they found a parking ticket on their windshield. Not devastating, just inconvenient. The gathering happened on a Saturday in late November, one of those pewter-colored days when the sky looks like it's considering something unpleasant. Marisol had summoned us all to her house in the hills, the house she'd lived in since before Cormac and I were born, with its terracotta floors and its garden full of things that needed tending, and its particular smell of cedar and old paper and something floral I could never name. It was her birthday, 72, a number that felt both ancient and strangely young for someone who had always seemed timeless to me, the way monuments seem timeless, unmovable, unaffected. We arrived first, Sable and I, because I still had the reflexive instinct to be early, to be prepared, to give my mother no ammunition. Sable wore her best dress, bottle green with small buttons shaped like beetles that she'd chosen herself from a shop in the city. She'd also brought a drawing she'd made, a blue-ringed octopus, rendered in colored pencil with an accuracy that had astonished her teacher, who'd asked if she'd traced it. "I never trace," Sable told him, in a tone that suggested she found the question faintly offensive. She brought the drawing rolled in a cardboard tube, tied with a piece of string. She'd been working on it for 3 weeks. Cormac's family arrived 40 minutes later, filling the entryway with noise and scarves and the particular energy of people who are comfortable somewhere. Theoden was 14 and handsome in the way teenage boys sometimes become overnight, all cheekbones and new height. Brix was 11 and could not enter a room without announcing himself. Orla was 6 and clung to Cormac's leg and watched Sable with enormous eyes. My mother had set the living room up with intention. The furniture rearranged, the good tablecloth on the low table, the crystal bowl that only came out for ceremonies. She kissed Cormac on both cheeks. She squeezed Fenna's hands and said she looked radiant. She touched Theoden's face and said something about how fast. She lifted Brix and pretended to strain under his weight, and he laughed his enormous laugh. She held Orla for a long moment, her chin resting on the top of the child's head, her eyes closed. She looked at me and said, "You're wearing that color again." I was wearing gray. I have always worn gray. I do not know why this is a recurring observation. She did not look at Sable. This was not new. But it also never stopped feeling new, the way a bruise never stops being tender, no matter how many times you press it. We sat. Tea was made. There was cake from the Portuguese bakery on the corner, the one with the custard tarts in the window. Cormac told a long story about a renovation project at his firm that everyone laughed at in the right places. Fenna described a trip they were planning to the Azores, And my mother asked 17 questions about it, where they'd stay and what they'd eat, and whether the children had their sea legs yet. I drank my tea. Sable sat beside me and ate her slice of cake with careful precision, the way she did everything, and occasionally I felt her press her knee against mine, which was something she did when she was thinking hard about something. Then my mother stood up and said she had something for the grandchildren. She said it like that, the grandchildren. I watched her walk to the hallway and I already knew. I knew the way you know a storm is coming, not from the clouds, but from the way the air changes, goes very still and electric. I had known, actually, since we sat down, since the first moment she hadn't looked at Sable, since the particular quality of her not looking, which was not the not looking of oversight, but the not looking of decision. She came back with a cloth bag, the kind with handles, the kind you carry things of value in. She called Theoden first. She gave him a slim box. Inside, a watch, silver, with a face like a compass. He made a sound of genuine wonder and held it up to the light. She called Brix next. A pair of over-ear headphones, the expensive kind he'd been asking for since summer, in a color he'd specified once in passing and she'd remembered. He put them on immediately and did not take them off for the rest of the afternoon. She called Orla. A bracelet, delicate gold chain, a single pearl drop. Orla held it up and turned it slowly and said it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. My mother helped her put it on and kissed the top of her head. Then she sat down. The bag was on the floor, empty or near enough to it. I waited. She picked up her tea. I waited. Fenna said something about the bracelet, how lovely, how thoughtful. Cormac said something about the watch. The room filled with the comfortable sound of people talking around something, which is a sound I know very well because I have been listening to it my entire life. Sable was very still beside me. I looked at my mother. She was nodding at something Fenna said. She had the expression she wore when she was fully present, fully engaged, fully satisfied with the shape of the moment. I said quietly, "Mom." She turned to look at me. "You forgot someone." There was a pause. A specific kind of pause, one I recognized. The pause before the explanation. The pause before the reason that was not really a reason. She said, "Vesper." And then she said the thing. She said it in a voice that was almost gentle, which was somehow worse than if she'd been sharp about it. She said it in the tone of someone stating a regrettable but objective fact, the way a doctor might describe a prognosis. She said, "Sable is not really family." The words went into the room and stayed there. Not really family. I looked at my daughter who had my jaw and her father's eyes and her own extraordinary mind. My daughter who had been coming to this house for 8 years. My daughter who had drawn a blue-ringed octopus for 3 weeks with a precision that astonished her teachers. My daughter who had sat here for every Christmas and every Easter and every birthday in her entire life. Not really family. I understood, of course, the technical argument, though I want to be clear that understanding an argument and accepting it are entirely different things. Sable was adopted. She came to me at 14 months from a small city in the north, in the depths of January, and she was wearing a yellow onesie that was slightly too small for her, and she had a small patch of dry skin above her left ear, and she looked at me with an expression of absolute calm assessment, like a judge deliberating. I knew in the first 3 seconds. I knew the way you know something that belongs to you, not by ownership, but by recognition. She was mine. She is mine. She will be mine until I am no longer anything. The room was silent. Cormac looked at his plate. Fenna looked at the window. Theoden had the headphones halfway on, not listening. Brix was frozen mid-reach for a second slice of cake. Orla looked at her bracelet. Nobody spoke. Nobody said, "Marisol, that's not acceptable." Nobody said, "Actually, she is family, and I'm not going to pretend this is normal." Nobody said anything. This was not new either. The silence of people who know something is wrong, but have calculated that speaking will cost them more than not speaking. I knew that silence. I had lived inside it. I had been the person maintaining it, before I understood that my maintenance was not kindness, but cowardice. I looked at my mother. I did not speak. And then, from beside me, very quietly, I heard Sable move. She had been sitting still this whole time. Very still, the way still water is still. Not because nothing is happening beneath it, but because everything is happening beneath it. She had heard the words. I knew she'd heard them. She had pressed her knee against mine and held it there, and I had pressed back, and for a moment I thought she might cry. I thought she might ask me why in the voice that destroyed me every time, that small, confused why that I had no good answer for. But she did not cry. She reached down under the chair and she pulled out a box. It was a shoebox, one of hers, the one she kept her word cards in. She had wrapped it, not beautifully. The paper was misaligned and the tape was slightly crooked, and there was a small drawing in the corner of what appeared to be a jellyfish. She had tied it with a ribbon the color of old gold. She placed it on the table. She pushed it across the table toward my mother. She said, "Grandma, Mom told me to give this to you if you ever ignored me again." Her voice was entirely steady, not cold, not trembling, not theatrical, just steady. The voice of someone who has thought this through and arrived at the other side of their decision and is at peace with it. My mother looked at the box. Then she looked at me. I held her gaze. I said nothing. She looked back at the box. Nobody in the room moved. She picked it up. She turned it in her hands, slowly, carefully, the way you handle something when you're not sure what's inside. She looked at the jellyfish drawing in the corner. Her face, for a single second, was entirely unguarded. I saw something move across it that I couldn't name. She pulled the ribbon. She unwrapped the paper. She opened the box. She screamed. Not a short sound, a sustained animal sound, the kind that empties a room of air, the kind that makes every person in a space simultaneously stand up. Cormac knocked over his tea. Fenna grabbed Orla. Brix dropped his headphones. Theoden stood up so fast his chair scraped. My mother dropped the box and stepped back from the table and pressed herself against the wall, her hand over her mouth, her eyes enormous. The box had fallen on its side, and from it, slowly, deliberately, as if it had been waiting for exactly this moment, crawled a blue-ringed octopus. No, not a real one. I need to say that now before you imagine the wrong thing, before you picture something dangerous. It was ceramic. A small, perfect, hand-painted ceramic octopus, about the size of a fist, detailed in extraordinary blue-ringed accuracy, with the rings picked out in a paint that caught the light and glowed faintly, like something lit from within. Sable had found it in a shop that sold oceanic curiosities. She had saved her pocket money for 11 weeks to buy it. I had not known until that moment what she planned to do with it. But in the tumbling of it from the box, in the sudden appearance of it on the white tablecloth, in the particular quality of that faint glowing blue, my mother had not seen a ceramic figurine. My mother had seen something alive. The silence that followed her scream was a different kind of silence than the one before it. Before, the silence had been the silence of avoidance. This was the silence of rupture, of a surface that had been intact for a very long time and had just in one moment come apart. My mother was still pressed against the wall. She was breathing. Sable picked up the octopus from the tablecloth. She held it up so everyone could see it clearly. She said in the same steady voice, "It's ceramic. I painted it myself. It took me 4 weeks. The blue-ringed octopus is the most venomous cephalopod in the world, but it's very small. People underestimate it." She set it back in the box. She looked at my mother. She said, "I looked up what you said. Not really family. I wrote it on a card." She reached into the pocket of her bottle green dress and she produced an index card. She placed it on the table. On it, in her small, careful handwriting, were 2 words, "Not really." She said, "I'm putting it in my collection, the words that are wrong." My mother slowly came away from the wall. Something was happening to her face. I had watched my mother's face for 37 years, cataloged every expression she possessed, learned their meanings the way you learn a language you live inside of. I had seen her contemptuous and tender and bored and bright and distant. I had seen her in grief, at my father's funeral, her face like something that had been struck and was still vibrating. I had seen her in triumph and in exhaustion and in the specific smug satisfaction of being correct. I had not seen this. I did not have a word for it yet. Perhaps I needed Sable's help with that. Cormac said, "Mom." Fenna put her hand on my arm and then took it off again and looked out the window. My mother walked back to the table. She picked up the ceramic octopus. She held it and looked at it for a long time. Then she set it down, carefully, on the tablecloth. She looked at Sable. Sable looked back at her, without flinching, without performance, with nothing in her expression except the clear and very patient intelligence she had been born with and had been refining every day since. My mother said, "I owe you an apology." The words came out slowly like something being unwrapped that had been wrapped for a long time. She said, "I owe you more than that." She sat down in her chair. She looked suddenly smaller, which is something I had never seen in her before. The largeness of her was structural, I had thought, not circumstantial. But she was smaller now. She said, "Your mother knows." She looked at me when she said it. I held her gaze. She said to me, "I don't know how to fix it." I said, "You start by acknowledging it exists." She looked at the index card on the table. Not really. She said, "She's extraordinary." I said, "I know." She said, "She's yours." I said, "She has always been mine." The room held this. The pewter light from outside came through the windows and fell across the table, across the ceramic octopus with its glowing rings, across the index card, across all of us. Orla leaned over from her father's side and poked the octopus gently with one finger. She said, "Is it real or pretend real?" Sable said, "It's art. Art is its own kind of real." Orla considered this with great seriousness and then nodded. Brix put his headphones back on. Theoden sat back down. Cormac picked up the cloth with his spilled tea and dabbed at the tablecloth in the careful, useless way of someone who doesn't know what else to do. I looked at my daughter. My daughter, who had spent 11 weeks saving pocket money and 4 weeks painting a ceramic octopus, and who had written 2 words on an index card, and who had sat in that living room while her grandmother distributed watches and bracelets and belonging to everyone except her, and had waited, and had been ready, and had not cried, and had not performed, and had done something so precise and so right that I still didn't have the full shape of it. She caught me looking. She pressed her knee against mine. I pressed back. Later, in the car, driving home in the dark, she asked me, "Did I do the right thing?" I thought about it. I thought about all the years I had stayed quiet, all the times I had translated my mother's cruelty into complexity, her indifference into difficulty, her deliberate silences into something I could live with. I thought about every time Sable had come home from that house and said nothing about the way she'd been looked at, or not looked at, which was its own kind of saying something. I said, "You did the exact right thing." She said, "I was nervous." I said, "I couldn't tell." She said, "That's the point. The blue-ringed octopus is only dangerous when you don't see it coming." She looked out the window at the dark moving past. After a moment, she said, "I have a new word for the collection." I said, "What is it?" She said, "Reckoning. Reckoning. It means calling something to account for what it is." I drove. The road curved through the hills and the lights of the city opened below us, scattered and glittering, and I thought about reckoning, and what it costs, and what it gives back, and how an 8-year-old girl had done in one afternoon what I had failed to do in 37 years. My mother called the following morning. She asked if she could come to see us. I said yes. She brought the octopus. She'd found a small wooden stand for it, the kind used for decorative spheres, so it would sit upright. She set it on Sable's bookshelf, between a volume on bioluminescence and a dictionary of rare words. She stayed for 3 hours. She asked Sable to teach her about deep-sea creatures. Sable, after a careful pause, said yes. I made tea. Outside, the light was doing something extraordinary with the clouds, turning them colors that didn't have names yet, and I thought, some things break in ways that allow more light in. Some ruptures are not endings, but new surfaces. Some reckonings are not punishments, but invitations. My daughter pulled out a volume and opened it to a page and began to explain. My mother leaned forward and listened. I stood in the doorway and watched. If this story moved you, like this video and subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next.